Imagine waking up one day and realizing that nothing truly shocks you anymore. Not betrayal, not loss, not even pain. Life moves around you like a storm you have already survived too many times. While others panic at the thunder, you stand quietly in the rain. Not because you were fearless, but because something inside you has already been weathered by too many storms. You listen to people complain about ordinary problems, a stressful job, an argument with a friend, a disappointing day. You nod, you empathize, you say the right words. But somewhere deep inside, a strange thought lingers. If only they knew. Not in arrogance, not in bitterness, just a quiet awareness that your internal world has been shaped by experiences most people will never fully understand. And the strangest part is that sometimes you wonder if something inside you has permanently changed. Because when someone goes through too much pain, too much chaos, too much uncertainty, the mind begins to evolve in ways that are difficult to explain. You start noticing patterns others miss. You notice how easily people trust, while your mind instinctively searches for hidden intentions. You notice how others believe things will work out, while you silently prepare for every possible disaster. You notice how people chase happiness, while you focus on survival. And this raises a disturbing question. What really happens to someone who has gone through too much? Do they become stronger, or do they become something else entirely? Society loves the story of resilience. You're stronger because of what you went through. It sounds comforting, it sounds inspiring, but if that were completely true, why do people who have suffered deeply often feel something very different? A quiet numbness, a constant sense of alertness, a strange emotional distance between themselves and the world. It is as if part of their mind never left the storms they escaped. They laugh with friends, they go to work, they live normal lives, but behind their eyes, another reality exists, one shaped by lessons learned through pain. Sometimes it appears as silence, sometimes as overthinking, sometimes as an almost supernatural ability to read people instantly. Pain sharpens perception. And if you pay attention, you might notice something fascinating about those who have suffered deeply. They often possess two opposing qualities at the same time. They are incredibly empathetic, yet emotionally guarded. They crave connection, yet expect disappointment. They care deeply about others, yet keep their own inner world hidden. It is as if they live between two psychological realities. One part of them still hopes, another part already understands how fragile everything truly is. But here's the paradox that few people talk about. When someone goes through too much suffering, the mind does not simply heal and return to normal. It adapts, it rewires, it builds psychological armor. And eventually, that armor becomes so deeply integrated into their identity that they can no longer remember who they were before the storms began. So the real question is not just about trauma, it's about transformation. What happens to the human mind after enduring too much pain? Why do some people emerge with wisdom beyond their years, while others become emotionally distant from the world? Why do those who have suffered deeply often see truths others cannot? And why do they sometimes feel strangely alone, even in rooms full of people? To understand this, we must look deeper into the hidden psychological forces that shape people after too much suffering. Because the mind does not simply remember pain, it reorganizes itself around it. The human brain is designed first and foremost for survival. Every experience teaches it something about the world. When life repeatedly exposes someone to instability, betrayal, or emotional chaos, the mind begins to build new rules for living. These rules are rarely conscious. They quietly shape perception and behavior. A person who has been hurt too many times learns to observe carefully. They study people. They notice the small pauses in conversation, the subtle tension in someone's voice, the difference between genuine warmth and polite kindness. What others call intuition is often the result of experience. Pain trains perception. Psychologist Carl Jung once described something he called the shadow. The shadow is the hidden part of the psyche containing fears, suppressed emotions, and painful experiences. Most people avoid confronting this side of themselves. They keep it buried. But people who have gone through too much often meet their shadow early. Life forces them to confront realities others can ignore for years. They learn that trust can break, that stability can disappear overnight, that people are capable of kindness and cruelty at the same time. And once you see these truths clearly, innocence is difficult to recover. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche believed that suffering forces individuals to confront the deepest questions of existence. Why does life contain so much struggle? Why do people hurt one another? What gives meaning to pain? People who have endured too much often begin asking these questions earlier than others, because without meaning, suffering becomes unbearable. So the mind searches for patterns and explanations. Sometimes these explanations create wisdom, other times they create protective beliefs. You might begin to think that expecting disappointment is safer than believing in hope. You might decide that relying only on yourself prevents betrayal. You might learn to hide your emotions because vulnerability once led to pain. These beliefs are not irrational. They are survival strategies. They are the mind's attempt to protect itself. But over time, they also create distance. Distance from optimism, distance from trust, distance from the simple emotional openness that others enjoy. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer believed that suffering reveals the fundamental nature of life. Most people spend their lives avoiding this realization, but those who have experienced too much cannot ignore it. They understand the fragility of everything: relationships, security, plans for the future. All of it can change in an instant. This awareness makes them more thoughtful, more cautious, and often more introspective. But it also creates a subtle tension, because once the mind learns to expect danger, peace begins to feel unfamiliar. Calm can feel temporary, kindness can feel suspicious, and happiness can feel fragile. This psychological shift quietly shapes the rest of a person's life. The consequences of enduring too much suffering rarely appear dramatically. Instead, they emerge in subtle patterns of thought and behavior. One of the most common consequences is emotional self-protection. People who have suffered deeply often become careful about who they trust, not because they dislike people, but because experience taught them how easily trust can break. This can create a strange paradox. They want connection more than most, but they fear it more than most. Another consequence is overthinking. When the brain learns that unexpected events can cause serious pain, it begins constantly analyzing the future. What if this goes wrong? What if this person leaves? What if things fall apart again? The mind tries to predict every possibility to avoid being hurt. This habit is not weakness, it is the brain attempting to protect danger. But constant anticipation creates exhaustion. Life becomes something to analyze instead of something to experience. Another quiet effect of repeated pain is emotional numbness. When someone experiences overwhelming emotions too often, grief, fear, heartbreak, the brain sometimes reduces emotional intensity as a protective measure. It lowers the volume of feelings. But when pain becomes quieter, joy also becomes quieter. Life begins to feel muted, not empty, just distant. Yet there is also something remarkable that develops: empathy. People who have suffered deeply often understand pain in others instantly. They notice sadness behind smiles.
They recognize loneliness in a crowded room. They feel the emotions others hide. But this empathy usually exists alongside strong emotional boundaries. They listen to others, they offer support, yet they rarely speak openly about their own wounds. And slowly, another change occurs. Identity shifts. People who have endured too much often become independent much earlier than others. They learn to solve problems alone. They learn not to rely too heavily on anyone. They learn that survival sometimes requires emotional self-sufficiency. This independence can become a quiet strength, but it can also create a subtle loneliness. Because while others lean on relationships for stability, they have learned to rely mostly on themselves. Over time, they begin to feel like observers of life rather than participants.